The focus of a boundary should be on, I need to do what's best for me. And the focus of an ultimatum is, I just want you to do what I want you to do, what I want, what I want you to do.
So I feel like if we take a look at it from that perspective, an ultimatum will shift the power dynamics in the relationship that your relationship may or may not be able to recover from, because there is a lack of partnership and responsibility on behalf of the person giving the ultimatum. Whereas the tone of a boundary is a lot more self-aware and a lot more neutral versus an ultimatum. Welcome to the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Perda. As a marriage coach who's married with 3 kids, I know how much parenthood could change a marriage. If flirting, laughing, and having fun together feels like a thing of the past, then I'm here to teach you that marriage doesn't have to feel so hard with your parents, and your marriage can thrive even when you're in the season of raising kids. Whether you're in a good place in your marriage and you just want to continue growing together, or you're wondering if you even like your spouse anymore, this podcast has something for you. Join me here each week as we dive into what it takes to help your marriage grow, and maybe even do a 180. You'll learn ways to handle conflict better, bring that spark back into your relationship, as well as learn how to improve other areas of your life from my lovely guest experts. Are you ready for the next stage of your life in marriage? Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. This episode is a really fun one because this is something I haven't done before on the show. And I'm here with Willborn, and she also is a marriage coach. And we're actually going to air this particular episode on both of our podcasts, okay? So if you're not coming here on the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast, then hi, I'm Michelle Perda. I'm a marriage coach, and I'm so excited to be here to talk about the topic of boundaries versus ultimatums. Are they the same? Are they different? We actually don't know the answer yet. We're going to figure that out in this conversation. And for those who are on my show, this is Nevart. Welcome, Nevart.
Hi. This is so fun. Okay, so this wasn't the plan until like 40 seconds before we hit the record button. So we were supposed to just record an episode for one of our shows, and we decided we're doing it for both. So yes, my name is Nevart Willborn, and to all my listeners, welcome to Childproof Your Marriage, my podcast all about helping parents reprioritize their marriage after having children. And so for those that didn't listen to our previous episode, Michelle, you and I actually did a part 1 of this topic. Part 1 was all about what are boundaries and how do we implement healthy boundaries in a relationship. And part 2 today is there a difference between a boundary and an ultimatum? And like you said, we don't actually know our own opinion about that, so we're going to wing it.
Yeah. So where do we start? You want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So I actually listened to our first episode so I could remember what we said, but we did a really, really nice job of explaining and defining what a boundary is. And then we kind of talked about how boundaries can be implemented well in a relationship. So we talked about, that a boundary is really about teaching people how to treat us, and that it's not about the other person. It's about us. It's about, here's what I need, and how do I get the person that I'm in a relationship with to provide the things that I need for me? And what I mean by that is not a manipulation or all about me. It's if I'm having an issue with some aspect of our relationship, like in communication, for example, I shut down when someone comes at me with a heavy tone. So then my boundary needs to be to explain to my partner, my spouse, say, listen, from now on, if you come to me in a tone that's really, really upsetting to me, or these words, I've already made it clear that those words are upsetting, these trigger terms or whatever. If you come to me with those, I'm going to remove myself from the conversation. I'm going to hold up maybe 3 fingers because that's the code that you and I are coming up with, or 4, or just a hand, like a stop sign. And that's my code for, I am feeling really uncomfortable. I need to remove myself. And once I do this, this is going to be healthier for us. And then I will come back when I've calmed down. So that's me setting a boundary. The boundary isn't, I told you I don't like those words, and every time you come at me with those words, blah, 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 right? So we defined boundaries. We gave a lot of explanations and examples, and then we talked about how to implement it correctly and kind of the pros and cons. So recap. So part 2, Michelle, what is an ultimatum? Should we Google?
Yeah, let's Google it.
Okay, an ultimatum, according to Google, is a final demand or statement of terms, the rejection of which will result in retaliation or a
Ooh.
breakdown in relations.
Ooh.
Right?
That latter half is a big thing.
Rejection of which will result in retaliation. So if you don't do what I tell you to do, we're going to have a breakdown of some sort.
Yes. Yeah. But retaliation is a very offensive word, right? Whereas how we define boundaries, it's very much, okay, if this, then that. I'm not doing anything to you. I'm doing something with myself to protect myself, right? It's not like with your example, if you use a harsh tone with me, I'm going to continuously tell you to stop and make you shut up. No, I'm removing myself from the situation so that I can regulate myself. Yep. That is very different.
Yeah. Very, because I think when we talk about the need for a boundary, it's usually because of something of it's the behavior that we are trying to change is one that is creating a problem in our lives. It's not, again, the goal is not to assert control over the person that we're in a relationship with. It's to improve the relationship. And there are lots of examples you can think of, but when you talk about an ultimatum, it's usually, I want this. If you don't give me this, then I'm done. And the confusion there is boundaries can be about the same issue. Like the problem itself, the I want this, if you don't give me this, that issue can be the same. The delivery and the message and the meaning is really what differentiates, I think, a boundary from an ultimatum. So if I say, give me this or else, that's an ultimatum. But if I say, I am no longer going to stand for this, I'm going to remove myself. If this doesn't change, I'm done. So the result can be the same. The control and the approach, control of others versus the control of self. Maybe let's distinguish that.
Yeah,
What's the difference in that?
I agree with that, because when I hear ultimatum, I don't know about you, but when I hear ultimatum, it means if you do this, provide this for me, then I will stay. If you do not, then I will leave.
Yeah.
Right? So it's conditional. But there are situations in marriages where there's a compatibility issue. But it would be a boundary or an expression of your needs if you say, in a relationship, I need these things. And it doesn't seem like this relationship is providing that to me. That's different, because it's not an attack. It's not saying, I need this from you. I need this from any relationship that I'm in. I just so happen to be in a relationship with you at this moment. And when I don't have it, then I don't feel secure, whatever, satisfied in the relationship. And so I feel like ultimatum is like you said, exerting control over someone, saying, hey, if you want to stay with me, you got to do this. Whereas I feel like, I don't even know if boundary is the right word when it comes to talking about compatibility. Is it?
I mean, I think it depends on the situation. I think if the boundary, if the issue is, look, I'm not capable of responding well to that style. Like, you want me to do this and I just don't, that doesn't fit me. So it is my bad. Like, I could give in, do the thing that's really not comfortable for myself, and that way compromise or meet in the middle. But by doing that, I'm going to be giving up something that it's too much. It takes away from my ability to be really genuine and organic in this relationship. So I have to say no. I have to put up my own boundary, my own line, and say, I can't do that. Now, if the result is that you're also not able to cross a certain point, and meeting in the middle really becomes kind of impossible, then we're not compatible. But for each of us to get to that point, we have to figure out, what do we want? What do we need? What are we willing to compromise on? And if that answer leaves us with a too big of a gap to bridge, then it's a boundary based on being incompatible. But if it's, I just don't want to compromise, I don't like your way, and you like, I just don't want to give in kind of thing. That's more of an ultimatum. And again, it's so complicated because it is kind of the same thing. In the end is we're just not compatible. Whether I want to exert control over you or I want to control myself and the end result is we're not to be together, it's still a problem. But the focus of a boundary should be on I need to do what's best for me. And the focus of an ultimatum is I just want you to do what I want you to do, what I want, what I want you to do.
So I feel like if we take a look at it from there, from that perspective, an ultimatum will ultimately, no, is that a pun? I don't know, whatever.
Yeah,
it will ultimately shift the power dynamics in the relationship that your relationship may or may not be able to recover from, because there is a lack of partnership and responsibility on behalf of the person giving the ultimatum. Whereas a boundary is very much like, I feel like the tone of a boundary is a lot more self-aware and a lot more neutral versus an ultimatum.
Yes.
Would you agree?
100%. Okay, so as you were saying that, what I was thinking is, for example, that's like me saying, hey, I don't want to do this, so I'm going to go ahead and say, here's my stopping point. I want you to take that. I want you to think about that and decide how you feel about that. If that bothers you, then we're going to have to figure out either we can compromise or we're just on opposite sides. So in basically a boundary is I am giving you an opportunity to think about where I'm coming from and make a decision for yourself based on where you know my line is. An ultimatum is I don't care what you want. If you don't do this, so it's right here, right now, pressure, pressure, pressure.
Yes.
If you don't do what I want you to do, we're done. So a boundary should be no pressure. If you don't like it, best of luck to you. The other is do it or else, and then the guilt and the I'm putting pressure on you to do what I want you to do. So boundary ultimately gives you a choice, and ultimatum removes choices from you and gives me the control.
Yes. And it's an exertion of power.
Yes.
Right? It's very emotionally driven. Like, if you don't follow through on this, then I'm going to make your life a living hell, whether it means I'm leaving or, we're both going to separate, but I'm going to make you really regret not following through and doing what I want you to do. Whereas the other one has a sense of autonomy given to both sides. It's like you get to make a decision that's best for you, and I get to make a decision that's best for me. And I'm sharing with you, like I'm putting all the cards on the table so you know what we're dealing with. Yeah. Whereas in the ultimatum standpoint, it seems a lot more rigid and less compassion.
Yeah, it's less about the relationship and it's more about the person getting what they want. So I have an example, and this would be fun. So this whole topic, when a few months ago, I was like, I want to do an episode about boundaries versus ultimatum. It came because of a conversation I was having with a client. I'm a therapist, right? So one of my clients, and I make him listen to this and he's going to know what we're talking about. The conversation was around finances, right? Being in a relationship with someone as being a little later on in life. So not young, families established, finances established. But one person saying, I have been through financial struggles before. I'm at a point in my life where I got myself here through very, very hard work, and I'm still working on it, but I'm here because I worked hard on it. Now I would like for you to move in with me, but your finances are not where they would need to be for us to successfully merge our lives together. If you move in, we're going to experience financial hardship because we're just not, we haven't, we're bringing different things to the table. And he was feeling very guilty about that because that felt like an ultimatum to him. Like, I'm telling this person, if you don't get your finances in order, I can't have you live with me. Whereas my perspective was like, no, that's a boundary. You're saying I cannot financially put myself in a position where I potentially struggle again, because the struggle will happen. We'll merge things in a way that it's just going to take away. I don't have the ability to kind of cover your bills because you can't cover your own bills. And so that's where it was like, oh my God, is there a difference between a boundary and an ultimatum? And again, the result is the same. The result is we can't live together till this is resolved. But one is threatening a I'm not going to have you live with me. Like, get your shit together and then we can live together. And the other is, I care so much for you and I love you, but this isn't smart for us. And I have to draw that line. So I don't know. Am I looking at it differently? Am I wrong?
No.
What do you think?
I agree completely. I think that with a boundary, there's a lot more intention and thought behind it. And I feel like there's an additional layer of self-awareness. Like there is some level of self-awareness when it comes to serving up an ultimatum, but there's a lot of lack of self-awareness too, because you feel like exerting control is the only way to move forward to get what you want, instead of using effective communication, which is what healthy boundaries require.
Right. Yeah. Because I think it's respecting the other person. One
Absolutely.
is, listen, I don't want you to, like if that is a deal breaker for you, like if me saying, I don't think we can live together because of this is a deal breaker for you, or like, well, then I don't want to be in a relationship with someone if I can't live with them, then I think we've hit an impasse and we can't move forward together. Whereas the other one is, well, if you wanted to live with me, then you would do this and you would do this. And it's very much oh my gosh, I feel like I have to give up my autonomy, to your point, to please this other person. And then ultimatums lead to resentment. Now, a boundary can lead to hurt, but a boundary shouldn't lead to resentment. If it's leading to resentment, then maybe it's not really a boundary and it's more of an ultimatum. But because a boundary should always give you the opportunity to see where I'm coming from, decide how you feel about it, and then make a decision based on that, versus the other one is like, I have no autonomy. So if I'm moving forward with this, then I am giving in. Yeah. And I am basically agreeing to do whatever you want me to do. And that's not healthy.
Yeah. It's essentially trapping that person. Yeah. And either way, like whether they decide to make changes or not, it will hurt the relationship. Yeah. Because it got to that point, rather than just being more logical about it, because you were able to work through your emotions to get to the point where you were able to express it as a boundary rather than an ultimatum. Like, look, if you have given ultimatums, we're not saying like, oh my gosh, you're a horrible person, because I feel like we initially, in our high emotions, which by the way, when we're high on emotions, we're low on intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. When we're high on emotions, our minds are likely starting with an ultimatum. So I feel like boundaries are an evolved version of ultimatums.
I like that.
Yeah?
Yeah. And okay, so because you brought up a really good point that I think is helpful to dive into. One way or another, there will be hurt. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people, the reason that it's hard to implement a boundary is because the hurt factor. I don't want to hurt this person. And that is just part of having a relationship where you have to tackle tough topics or compromise or draw a line that you have to stand behind. So, if it hurts, that's okay. We don't stop because it's hurtful. I don't know. I think that change comes a lot of time because of some kind of hurt or disappointment. We hit a wall and then we have to really evaluate. And I'm not saying that the person giving the boundary or creating the boundary is perfect in their implementation, but it should open a conversation of like, hey, okay, well, I hear what you're saying, but can I challenge some aspects of that? Like, that seems unfair because of this, and this. Can we talk about maybe some ways that you're not looking at the big picture? And then ideally, it would create a great dialogue of, well, let's see if we're both looking at this the right way. And sometimes you need to take a minute and lick your wounds and then come back and be like, okay, I hear what you're saying. Can I present my perspective, right? And that's healthy. But the hurt piece, I think it just is going to be there. We got to talk about that.
Yeah. So the hurt, it comes from different places, though, when it comes to comparing boundaries and ultimatums, right? With boundaries, I think the hurt comes from learning about how you're impacting your partner, and that self-awareness and reflection hurts. It's like looking in a mirror, right? When we're faced with how we're flawed and how we're negatively impacting our partner, that's not something we're always aware of. And when it's pointed out, it hurts, right? But they're not out there trying to hurt us while sharing their boundary. Whereas an ultimatum is like, it is retaliatory in its like foundation, right? Like that's what it is. It's like, well, you've pushed me to my edge, whether you knew it or not, whether I shared that with you or not. And now I'm going to bounce that back to you, right? It's almost like, what is it? Misery loves company.
Yeah.
Hurt people hurt people. And so you're dishing it back rather than receiving that hurt that you've experienced, right? Them crossing your boundary that they knew or they didn't know that they were doing. And instead of taking that hurt and processing it and understanding, why do I feel hurt? What is it that's going on with me? What does this remind me of? What is it that I want? What do I need going forward? And then repackaging it through healthy communication. Right. You are dishing it back as, okay, well, you hurt me. I'm going to exert control over you so you know that you can't trap me. I'm going to do it to you instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So that resentment piece, right? Like if I feel controlled or if I feel like I'm cornered, then I'm just going to look for an opportunity to do that right back to you. Yeah. Because I want to level the playing field. Yep. But in a boundary, it should be for the sake of progressing the relationship. Yes. And not progressing one person's agenda, right? So maybe the complication there is if it's a less obvious boundary. Like let's say one person's boundary is okay, in our first episode we talked about a boundary, like a silly example, but it applies, where it's like, okay, if we're going out to dinner and I tell you, hey, I don't want to eat dessert tonight, so please make sure, like, don't let me cave. And then we go out to dinner and the dessert on the menu looks amazing and I want that dessert, and you're like, wait a minute, you told me to remind you that you shouldn't eat this dessert. I'll be like, it's fine, like, you're off the hook. And then the next day I jump all over your ass because I'm like, why did you let me eat that dessert? I told you not to let me. And I feel like crap about myself today. And you'd be like, dude, no, that is not my responsibility. First of all. Second of all, I did tell you and you just chose to make a different choice. Like, I can't be held responsible for that. So if it's a situation like that, then the boundary that that you would need to implement with me would be like, listen, from now on, I don't want to be asked to hold that responsibility for you. That's right. I don't want to make decisions for you. I don't want you to ask me to like motivate you or whatever. And then I could take that and be like, what, you don't want to help me? And you can be like, no, I always want to help you. But that is not helpful to you. And that is not healthy for our relationship. If you put me in that position where you want me to tell you what to do or hold you accountable, then you're putting me in a place where then I feel like I'm a parent. And then you resent me for either giving you that instruction that you told me to give you or not holding you to it. So for the sake of our relationship, I am drawing a line. I am no longer going to be given that responsibility. That is a healthy boundary. That's Absolutely. Not, an ultimatum version of that would be, ask me one more time and then I'm never going to go out with you again. Like that would be really ugly. Yes. That's not a boundary. That's just anger.
And I guess a good way to think about it is like, does it sound like your kids when they're arguing with each other? Like, if you do that one more time, then I'm not going to play with you anymore. So if it has that essence, try again. Go back to the drawing board, yes. Honestly, right? Like, how do you feel when you're coming up with this quote unquote boundary, right? Are you high on emotion? If you are, go back to the drawing board, take a break. It's okay to have several rough drafts and you don't have to share it right away. Like, I'm totally guilty of that in the past because I do have strong emotions. And I felt like in order for our relationship, if it was past relationships or in my marriage, if I didn't deal with it right away, that meant that I didn't care. But now I know it's healthy to take time to process it so that you are coming from a place where you're calmer, you've thought it out more, you've taken yourself into consideration, you've gone through the 5 layers of why, and you've gotten the space to consider your partner as well. A lot of couples don't get to that part, right? They're just all consumed with their emotions and how they've been treated and how it affects them, that they don't stop to think, I wonder why my partner thought that this is the best course of action. What was going on in their heads? What was their experience of this? If you are not at that space where you can wonder instead of like, oh my gosh, what were they thinking? Like, that's not what I mean, okay? Because that's judgment, right? But I mean like genuine curiosity.
Yeah.
If you're not there yet, you're not in any position to be creating a boundary because it's going to come out as an ultimatum.
Yep. And I love that because it kind of brings it full circle to what you and I teach, right? We teach strategies. We don't tell you what to do. We teach you strategies about how to have a conversation, how to grow in your relationship, how to work on yourself in the relationship. And this is one of those things because so much of the time we filter what our partner says through our own emotions and what we're going through and maybe our own trauma or bad history of experience in relationships. And so having that curiosity, curiosity is another word for
Compassion.
Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, I know my husband. Does my husband speak to me in an ugly way? Is he a jerk? Does he disrespect me? No, he doesn't. Okay, so I feel icky about the thing that he just said to me. So I have options. Do I assume he's an asshole and he really is just completely disrespectful of me? Or do I explore the possibility and become curious about a possible miscommunication or a misunderstanding on my part? Maybe he just didn't say it right. Maybe he was unfiltered because he's exhausted or he had a really crappy day at work. Or maybe he said it great, but I'm feeling insecure today. And so I received it in a negative way. So that's where I do a couple of things. I can calm down. I can go talk to him or I can go straight to him and be like, okay, what did you mean by that? Because I heard it. And again, sidebar, we teach you how to have these conversations. So what that means is tell your spouse from now on, I have a tendency to misunderstand things because I'm hyper emotional. Can I come to you if I'm like overthinking something, can I come to you and be like, babe, having a moment. Can you walk me through what you meant? Okay, so now if we've already had that pre-rule, then if I come to you and I'm like, okay, can you say that to me again? And I just want to make sure I understood, like, what did you mean when you said blah, blah, blah? Now that can clarify all of these hurts and miscommunications. So maybe a boundary is not necessary. Or he's going to reiterate something that you're like, ick. That was not cool. Okay, so here's what I need you, hubby, to understand. That hurt my feelings. And I don't know if you know, but this is why it hurt my feelings. And this is why I don't appreciate that. So let me explain it to you. And are we on the same page where you'll never say that to me again? Or if that continues to happen, hey, from now on, if you say that to me, I'm completely disengaging. I'm not having a conversation with you and you're going to owe me an apology, or whatever. So it's a really long-winded way of saying that, Michelle. I don't even know.
No, and this is a really good live example of the difference between healthy communication and unhealthy communication. Because in unhealthy communication, it's very easy to just run with what you perceived they said to you, right? Because it is all based on our past experiences, our lens through life, and also our current state of being, right? Because if you were someone who was in relationships where there was a lot of like name calling or criticism, or maybe your parents were, verbally abusive, unintentionally, hopefully, right? And your partner says something that reminds you of that. Your mind, your emotions, your whole body is going to take you back to that part of your life where that was a thing. And you're going to interpret it so much differently than how he probably meant it. And he over there is like neutral about saying whatever he's saying. And meanwhile, you're building up a million stories in your head about how he's such an asshole. How can he do this to you? Does he even love you? And what does this mean? And you're like moving at 100 miles an hour, and he has absolutely zero clue until you open your mouth. Now, when you have and build up that self-awareness, you will think to question it. But before you work on yourself, right, or with either of us as a marriage coach, you're probably going to just run with what you first perceive, and you're going to go at him. And he's like, what the hell is happening here? Why are you coming at me? What is wrong with you? And that's where we get into that hole where it's like you two are having two completely different conversations, and this is what leads to unresolved communication, resentment, frustration, anger, and just a whole slew of issues that continue to build on each other until you figure out how to pause in the moments of breakdowns and really figure out, where did we break down here?
Yeah.
How did we misinterpret what was going on so we can move forward?
Right. Yeah. And I think it cycles back to the ultimatum. I don't like the way he talks to me. So that's it. I'm going to give him an ultimatum. If he talks like that to me again, and a lot of the time, to your point, you have misunderstood, or he just needs coaching from you as his partner on what you need and how you need it. I think, and as the member of my marriage who is much more sensitive, I have always been much more emotional and sensitive than my husband. I've grown tremendously in the 20 years that we've been together. But I remember when I was younger and less self-aware and had done less work on myself, feeling so incredulous, like, how could he even talk to me that way? And why would he say that to me? Or how could he be so inconsiderate and rude? And then when I learned to talk to him about it, I realized, first of all, like you said, we were on completely different pages about what was said and how it was said. He's like, that's not what I said. That's not what I meant. And it could have come out of his mouth in a way that was less optimal, but it sure as hell wasn't as bad as I had interpreted it in my head. And even if it was, like, we just have different communication styles. He's a boy, I'm a girl. Like, so many things are different, right? And so over the years, we've grown together through conversations and communications and hard conversations and easier conversations. Like, all of it has led to, 20 years in, we rarely have any conflict because we know how to communicate differently. And when we do piss each other off, we know how to stop and pause. Because if we keep going down this road, one of us is going to say something we don't need to say. And that doesn't mean we don't experience feelings that are negative. It just means we don't let ourselves get into conflict, because we've learned more about ourselves and about each other. He knows I'm a baby. He knows he has to be more sensitive and delicate with me. You've been with me forever, so yay for learning, right? And I've also learned that, he's not an asshole. So if I've interpreted something he said as asshole-ish, it probably isn't what he meant. Let me give him a chance to reframe that, and it's usually fine.
Yes. It is incredible how, when you learn the tools, when it comes to self-mastery, self-regulation, communication, how it almost feels like we can slow time down, which is exactly what we need in moments of disagreement and conflict. Whereas before you learn them, it's almost like you're getting sucked into something that you didn't even know was there. And all of a sudden you're in the middle of a tornado and you don't know how to end it. And it just feels like so much adrenaline, so much emotion, and you just don't see a way out.
Right. Yeah. So start kind of taking us back to that ultimatum versus boundary. I mean, I know it seems like we went on a tangent, but it's all part of.
It's all related.
Yes. The way we communicate helps us create boundaries versus ultimatums, because all of us, no matter how long you've been with your significant other, no matter what the issue is, as your kids get older or as your life changes, then the things that you have to deal with change. And so you have to have communication and conversations about new topics. And so you will disagree, or you will have a little complicated pathway to agreement, but respect and knowing yourself and listening helps you to where you say, I don't agree with you. And we're going to like, here's my line. What's your line? And is there a way to meet in the middle? And if not, then we do maybe seek outside help, a coach, a therapist, or whatever. But ultimately, respect is one of the differences, the key differences between a boundary and an ultimatum. Do I respect you, or do I want to control you? Exactly. Do I value that you have a voice and autonomy? Or do I think you just need to do what I want because I matter more than you do?
Yeah. And I think if you find yourself at that point where you want to give an ultimatum, I want you to think about the long-term effects that it has on your marriage. Do you want him to, quote unquote, fall in line so he doesn't lose you? Or do you want him to actually choose to honor your boundaries, right? Like, I wouldn't want to stay with someone just because I made them. I would want to know that they're choosing that this is worth it to them to compromise.
Yeah. It makes me think of day-to-day examples, because I think of a lot of people, men or women, who just don't listen. They don't consider the other person in the day-to-day decisions. Like, we're going here, we're doing this is what time. And even if you are the default parent and you're the one that really does primarily run the home and the appointments or whatever, there's just something to be said about being considerate and being like, hey, spouse, kiddo so-and-so has an appointment at this time. I'm going to go get this kid. Are you good? Does your schedule align? Do you need me? Like, did you want to do that? Like, it's just being inclusive of that person, because then little things like, you have to go pick up the kid at this time. Okay, that wasn't very nice. Can you ask me? Like, hey, I have this. Can you get this other kid? Yeah, sure. But that goes both ways. There are some people that are like, well, I'm always the one that's having to coordinate. So why do I always have to be the one asking? No, you both should be, hey, thanks for picking up the kid, or hey, can you please pick up the kid? Like, it's this whole thing. And so if, a boundary can just be, hey, from now on, do you mind asking me instead of telling me? So really don't enjoy it when you text me and say, you must do, or like, go do this, or at this time you have to be here. I don't work well with that. Can you please just be kinder in your approach? That's a boundary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it all comes down to how much are you being partners? Is it interdependence, or is it independence and dependence, right? Because we want to strive for interdependence in the relationship.
Yep.
We want to consider every party in the situation, how they feel about it, not making decisions unilaterally, or just deferring to someone to make all the decisions if that's not the agreed upon dynamic. Because I know there's different kinds of dynamics in different relationships, yeah. Right? But rather, is this something that everyone is all on board with? Mm-hmm. Which is respect at its core.
Yeah. And things change. You could have started out with one dynamic, and circumstantially, or just preference, whatever, you're like, I don't like that anymore. I don't want that to be my prime responsibility anymore. Or look, now we have more than one kid and it's just not sustainable. That's where you sit down and you say, look, let's brainstorm new ideas. I can't be in two places at once. You can't be at two places at once. What are we going to do? And then that is what kind of nurtures growth and being on the same page and being interdependent, because it shouldn't be up to one person to solve an issue in the home and then just tell the other person. Now, you might have certain delegated responsibilities, like, hey, I don't want to, like, just tell me where to be. Figure it out. Tell me where to be. Agree. Because when I step in and try to plan that, I piss you off and I'm not good at it, right? So that's okay. But everyone has to be on board with that, because what you and I run into is one person has a responsibility and the other person doesn't like being left out, or the person with the responsibility is bitter about having that responsibility. Like, there's a lot of silent dissatisfaction, and that's what leads to unhealthy communication, and that's what leads to ultimatums. Like, it's just, there's so many roads towards an ultimatum, and roads that should, if just taken differently, if paths could be altered just a little bit, it could lead instead to a healthy boundary, and then everyone will be happier. But instead, it's that silent resentment that leads to an explosion of an ultimatum.
Yeah. And what you just shared reminded me of what I run into a lot with couples, is that they each fall into roles that they didn't decide Like it's kind of like, oh, I'll fill in here because I'm available and I'm capable and it's just easier if I do it. And then next thing you know, you're like, wait a minute, why do I have so much more to do? And why am I burned out and you seem like you're living large and thriving? And you get resentful. But I think from this whole conversation, what I'm gathering is respect and healthy communication is what's going to yield you a much better result when it comes to handling issues in the marriage, right? Like this will help you get to healthy boundaries and avoid ultimatums, which will then create more mutual satisfaction.
Yep.
No matter what ends up happening, right? If you end up divorcing, let me tell you, okay, like my parents are divorced. I've supported my clients who wanted to get a divorce. I will tell you, even though you have decided you want to go that route, you still got to work on communication because you want to be in a position to have clear communication with your co-parent.
Yeah.
Because once they're your co-parent and not your partner anymore, they have literally much less, maybe even zero reason to work with you.
Yeah.
They can make your life a living hell. So no matter what condition your relationship is in, you still got to work on that respect and healthy communication.
Yes, ma'am. 100%. I love it. It's beautiful. So in conclusion, people need to listen to part 1 and part 2 of our
Yes.
conversations. It's like, look at your partner, your spouse through the lens of your partner, your friend, someone that you want to lift up. And if the way that you treat them is mainly benefiting what you want, then you're being a selfish partner. You're not being a team player. You're hogging the ball on the court. You're not playing well with others. So just make sure you're passing the ball. Make sure you're constantly looking around, seeing where your partner is. Are they keeping up? Do you need to slow down? Do you need to help them come forward? Because you should never be or want to be in a position where you have power over your spouse. We don't ever want that.
No. And I just want to put this out there. I do tend to be more self-absorbed, but I would never say that I am selfish because I'm not consciously deciding not to care about other people. It's just that sometimes I just get stuck in my own experience. So even if listening to this, you're like, oh shit, I am actually being a selfish partner right now. It's okay. The fact that you are realizing that means that you can make a change for the better to support your marriage, to help your partner feel more seen and heard. Okay.
Yeah.
So no need to label, just recognize like,
Yeah.
oh, this is an area of growth for me. I haven't been very considerate about this. I've only been considerate in these areas. Okay. It doesn't mean that you're selfish across the board,
No.
but maybe there's just one area that you could be more thoughtful and compassionate towards your partner for and just work on it. There's always something to work on in your marriage. Even us too, like we've got stuff to work through. We are constantly having conversations with our spouses about new things that we're discovering that we need to work through. So no relationship is shielded from challenges.
No.
Okay. So we're just hoping that what we shared here today, or what you let us kind of unravel together, like what it all meant, is helping you grow your marriage, grow yourself as someone who is in a relationship, okay? Because it does come down to personal growth and your commitment to being respectful, getting better at healthy communication, and just being more intentional in general.
Yeah, and ongoing growth, like, right?
Ongoing.
So like even I learned so much about myself even through these conversations because
100%.
it's like journaling, right? The more you talk and think about something, the more aware you are of it. And so this is like our verbal journal, right? Every time I have a guest on, I'm like, oh my God, that was so fun. Like I want to do better, and we try to practice what we preach, but we're human and we come back here to discuss these topics because we're constantly working on these topics. And think of anything you're really good at, anything you're a master at, whether it's cooking or a sport. You still make mistakes. You still have a bad day. You still have errors where you're like, oh my God, I'm so off my game today. And that's marriage. That's relationships. Just keep practicing. And just, if there's a new skill you can pick up or a new tool you can learn, go for it. Don't ever think that you've learned it all, because none of us have. Ever.
And even then, even if you have learned it all, applying it is something different.
Practice anyway. You have to. Absolutely. But I love these conversations with you, because I feel like we bounce off each other so well, because we see things very similarly. So, I hope that both of our audiences can hear that, we're all a work in progress. And, anyone that needs that support, we're always here to give it, girl.
Yeah, we got you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for making it all the way to the end of this episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. Send me or Nevart a message if you're like, oh, we want more of these, and you have suggestions on what you want to hear us go into, because I am here for it all. I love doing these things. I will share in my show notes the link to the other episode that I did with Nevart on her show. Okay, so go check out her podcast, because there's so many resources out there to support you in your marriage as you are raising kids. And thanks for doing this with me, Nevart. This was amazing.
Tell, so that our audience can see here, what are your socials and where can people find you?
Yes. So mine is Michelle Perta Coaching on Instagram. And then my podcast is called the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast.
Excellent. And mine, on Instagram, I'm Nevart Willborn Coaching. And my podcast is called Childproof Your Marriage. And then my website is nevartwillborn.com. And I have a digital course and stuff there. And people can work with each of us individually and with their spouses. So we're kind of awesome. Just saying.
We are kind of awesome. Just saying. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, please send me a message over on Instagram at Michelle Perta Coaching to let me know what you loved most about it. Hearing from my listeners is my absolute favorite. And if you've been loving this podcast, please leave a rating and review. This will help people like you find the show and get the help they need. Catch you here on the next episode. Bye.